Running, yeah. Hello and welcome to episode 12 of From the Margin Lands. I'm Arti Kumar Rao.
It's been 12 episodes already. Hi,
Yes.
I'm Prem Panika.
And who do we have on today?
Right. So, our guest for this episode is someone who's literally been rewriting how we think about health, about wildlife, about policy. Dr. Abi Tamim Vanak, who runs the Center for Policy Design at R3. The thing about Abi, most researchers stick to one lane. What Abi does is he builds bridges across them all. He's tracked elephants in the African savanna. He's set up citywide surveillance mechanisms that uncovered rabies outbreaks that at the time no one else even realized existed. And he's shown how stray dogs can reshape entire ecosystems. He's got over 100 papers to his name. He's held editorial roles on major conservation journals. He has a knack for turning complex science into actionable policy. Uh, what Abi does is he sees connections that most of us miss, and he's probably the person you want to point to if you're looking for proof that the best science happens when you refuse to stay inside your academic silo. Please join us in welcoming Dr. Abi Vanak.
Welcome, Abhi. Welcome to From the Margin Lands. Thank you for taking the time to be with us here today. I'm Arti Kumar Rao.
Hi, Abi. I'm Prem, and like Aarti said, so nice of you to join in that too when you're traveling and presumably caught up in a whole lot of stuff.
My pleasure. Happy to be here.
Right. So, Aarti, you want to start off, or do I?
Okay, I can.
Hmm.
Abhi, you know, our pet peeve, right? Our soapbox that we're always on, the wasteland, the W word. So we in India seem to have this colonial hangover of calling really productive and important landscapes, commons, which are being used by people, by animals. We call them wastelands. Now, we used to even publish a wasteland atlas of India and all of that, which I hear now has been discontinued. Now, we have, I think, what is it? Some ridiculous amount of percentage of land as wasteland.
17%.
17%. 17% of it is wasteland, and then that informs a lot of decisions and policy that is made, right? Can you throw a little bit of light on the history of this misclassification and the repercussions of it?
So, the term wasteland really comes from British land administration terminology. It dates back actually to John Locke's philosophy of what would be what would be productive. And if it was not in private hands, and if it was not being put to use, then it was lying waste. And so that's the philosophy that the British colonial regime also imposed in India. So any land that was not producing crops that were useful to them, and therefore that could not be taxed or that they could not control production over, were then termed wasteland. And in this case, also areas that did not produce timber, for instance. So, things that were of material use to them directly.
Mm.
So our commons, grasslands, deserts, rivers, snow-capped mountains, etc. Those are all then wastelands. Uh, so that terminology sort of got embedded into modern policy making as well post 1947. And when the government set up the National Wasteland Development Board, it also formed a committee to then categorize landscapes that could be called wastelands. And that committee took the same thinking forward. In fact, if you actually go to what the National Wastelands Development Board in its earlier writings, in its report said, they said that these are lands that actually could be brought back into productivity through suitable vegetation and soil and moisture conservation work. So the idea of the Wastelands Board was not to convert them into something else, but rather to restore them back to productivity, because they assumed that they had become wastelands because of some poor land use practices, such as deforestation or soil degradation, etc., etc. And the idea to restore them actually was a sound one, if you took it from just a ecological or land use practice one.
Hmm.
What they didn't consider, though, and again, which was a colonial legacy, was that they considered open ecosystems to be degraded forests.
Hmm.
So if something didn't have lots of trees, then it was only because it was a result of deforestation by people. They did not consider, and this is strange actually, they did not consider that these are landscapes that have been shaped by climatic or geological or other factors. And that the idea that everything in India should be forests is not borne out by the evidence in front of. And so they imposed that idea, that thinking onto these lands. And some landscapes, such as deserts we've always vilified. We've always considered that, deserts are Registan. Greening a desert is always a very fruitful endeavor. It's always supposed to be this utopian vision that we should have,
Right.
without trying to understand that, it's a desert because it has no rainfall,
Mm-hmm.
that it's a natural uh, part of long-term climate cycles, that some
Mm-hmm.
parts will become drier, some parts will become wetter.
Right.
Therefore, um, therefore, the idea that you can convert drylands into productive forests and so on then becomes problematic, because water is your key limiting factor at every stage. And people simply don't consider water.
Mm-hmm.
They
You're
think
right.
water is always, and this is our problem, of course, with agriculture as well.
Yeah.
We think water is this super abundant resource. We can always, if it's not here, we can bring it from somewhere else, or we can pump it out of the ground. And this is going to hit us hard in the future. So this is where also the idea of wastelands, the idea that wastelands can get converted to other uses. If they can't be converted to productivity, then maybe we can convert them entirely to something else, such as industry, or more recently, convert them into solar power plants, or large scale agriculture, if by bringing water in from elsewhere.
Right. Um, Prim, I have a follow-up question, and then I'll bat it back to you. Just
Yeah,
one.
sure.
You mentioned open ecosystems. We will get to that. I do not want us to forget that. So let's just mark that and put a pin on it. I want to get back to open ecosystems, open natural ecosystems, which is something that you and Madhu have talked so eloquently about and are championing so importantly. That's one. But the question that I had when you were talking about this and about the government coming up with these policies and the National Wasteland Management Board and so on, where were the scientists who knew better?
That's an important question as well. Where were the scientists who knew better? They were there. But unfortunately, it seemed that, and with most ecologists, and conservationists, we don't look outside a little bubble.
Mm.
We mostly look at forest areas. We mostly look at forestry. We look at only the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change as being uh, the sole ministry that frames policies that concern environment. So the Wastelands Atlas was not produced by the Ministry of Environment. It was produced by the Ministry of Rural Development, and in particular the Department of Land Resources.
Land, yeah.
So then it never came into, probably the scientists at that time had not, searched for it or come across it. And they had also then considered, because some of these ideas are so pervasive that you never challenge them.
Hmm.
You assume that, yeah, it's something is called a wasteland. It's because it's barren, it's arid, it's not producing anything. But the scientists who were studying grassland species were championing the cause of grasslands
Hmm.
for a long period of time, but it was
Hmm.
just never embedded into national policy in
Hmm.
the same way that forests were. Um, and because grasslands could not be, in India, grasslands were never identified as grasslands, even though we had lots of species that were dependent on grasslands and savannas. So the only grasslands that were identified were the ones in the high altitude regions or in
Yeah.
the Tarai belt, or the alpine pastures or the Shola grasslands and so on. The low elevation savannas of India were never properly categorized as savannas,
Mm.
even though everything that we know about savannas from Africa and Australia and other places, we just have to look. If you took two photographs of an Indian savanna and an African savanna, you would not be able to tell the difference. So this is something that really, it intrigued me when I first started looking at this. And like, why is there this disconnect?
Mm.
Because I've been working in savannas pretty much my entire academic career, no matter what species I was working on.
Mm.
I was working on tigers for my master's dissertation in Panna Tiger Reserve. Panna is a beautiful classic savanna,
Mm.
but it's a tiger reserve. There are tigers there. People call it a forest, but
Yeah.
it's not a forest.
Yeah.
It's a savanna ecosystem, as classic a savanna as it can get. It has transition zones, but it's a very beautiful savanna ecosystem. Then post that for my PhD, when I started looking at, I studied lions for some time, Asiatic lions and gyr. Again, gyr is a savanna ecosystem, but you never hear that anywhere. You always hear it's being called as gyr
Gay
forest.
forest. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not.
Yeah.
Similarly, the great Indian bustard is not a forest. Everybody knows, oh, it's a grassland bird. But grasslands where? These are all savannas of different sorts. So, when I was looking at studying Indian foxes for my PhD, I was looking at all the drylands. I still had the same lens though. I still had the same protected, sorry, there's some construction going on. I'm going to repeat that so that very loud noise doesn't get. Um, so when I was, looking at grassland species, I was looking at species like the Indian fox, and I still had that same wildlife conservation lens, and I was only looking at areas within protected areas which had grasslands. So
Mm.
I went to Rolapadu, I went to Rani Benur, I went to Nanaj in Maharashtra, and again, it's a very lovely grassland. Oh gosh, I'm gonna have to figure out
It's
how
okay.
to.
No,
Not to
it's okay.
worry.
Don't worry
Not to
about
It's
it.
worry.
fine.
Not to worry.
It's
Yeah.
not too bad. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to figure out, you know, um, how to study these and understand where they were. So I did lots of surveys at that time to understand where I could study Indian foxes. And so I started my study, and then I realized, no, these grassland systems are all around us, all across Karnataka, Maharashtra, erstwhile Andhra Pradesh, like the United
Right.
Andhra Pradesh,
Right.
uh, Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh. All of these landscapes have very vast swathes of grasslands, but they're simply not part of the protected area network. Nobody talks about them.
Mm.
The forest departments have always been planting trees on them
Mm.
uh, to bring them under afforestation schemes. So that's when I started interrogating this idea a little bit more and wondered why there was this blind spot. And then that's when I came across this wastelands atlas. And then I looked at the areas that have been marked as wastelands. And I looked at the categories that have been marked as wastelands: land with open scrub, land with dense scrub,
It's
degraded grazing
crazy.
lands,
Crazy.
and so on.
Yeah.
And they've all been marked as wasteland. And that's when, this thought started that, this has to change. We have to recognize these for what they are. I think around in 2013, I wrote an article with some colleagues from ATRI. I called it "The Wastelands of the Mind," where I then brought out this, brought out this idea, and others had been also engaging with it. People like Jennifer Barker had written about wastelands in India, the idea of wastelands, but had looked at it more from land identity perspective. Um, so yeah, the idea that these landscapes were called wastelands somehow was quite problematic for me. And I started writing a little bit about this, talking to some more people, and trying to socialize the idea that this needs to change. Now, this as such didn't, I wasn't able to get as much momentum on this until maybe around 2012, 2013, when I got a MOEF grant to survey India's grasslands.
Mm.
And so that's when the first mapping exercise of India's grasslands started. And this was part of the National Environment Fellowship that the MOEF had just launched. And we did a lot of groundwork for the next 2 years. We drove all around the country trying to map these, use some satellite remote sensing as well to understand where these landscapes are. And it was what we realized was they're actually quite difficult to map. And then we
Mm.
understood why people have also been sort of not been engaging with these places. Because if you try to do a remote sensing exercise, then you'll find that there's a lot of overlap between agricultural land, agricultural fallows, and grasslands. Now, this is something you see on the ground as well. In the semi-arid landscapes, not everything gets plowed all the time. There's lots of fallow land, uh, which only in a very good year will end up being sown with a crop.
Right.
But for the rest of the time, it looks like a grassland. Within a year or 2 years, the grasses will come back, and it just looks like it's very similar to all that's adjoining. And so therefore the boundaries between what is natural habitat and what is farmland get blurred in these landscapes. So this was a challenge for us, trying to understand where the grasslands are. And this work, sort of continued off and on for the next few years. We published one map, and then I waited for some time, and then Madhu and I got together again in 2021, 22, and started trying to think of refining these maps to get a more accurate, more up-to-date map of grasslands. And that's when we also decided that we need a broader category. We can't just say grasslands, because you also have deserts, you also have rocky plateaus, rock outcrops, sand dunes. All of these are natural habitats that have been classified as wastelands. And so it's
Right.
important for us to map these all out. And so then we coined this term called open natural ecosystem. And this we said it's open because it's naturally treeless or very sparsely treed, and therefore different from a forest. And it's natural because we wanted to bring in the term natural, because you could also have degraded forests that will look like savannas and grasslands because the
Mm.
trees have been cut down and
Mm.
it's now been replaced by grasslands. So we wanted to make sure we bring that distinction in, that these are not degraded forests, that these are naturally the way they are, and that we need to also recognize them as key ecosystems in their own right. So this is when we came up with this omnibus category that we called ONEs, or now people call it ones. Um,
Do they?
so yeah, people say ones, and I was like, okay, that works. Um,
Uh,
it goes in with the one nation, one habitat.
One health, one
Sure.
habitat, everything. Yes. Yes.
So we'll go with that. Um, and and yeah, and so we surprisingly, the term caught on. We didn't. We suddenly started hearing everybody use the term ONE or one, and you're like, that's great. We hadn't done anything to really push it or publicize it, and yet everybody was very organically using it, because the thing is, clearly this is something that captures people's imagination. They understand it intuitively, at least the ones who are working on this.
Mm.
At least amongst. So our first challenge was convincing our fellow conservationists of the importance of these landscapes, because although people have been working on them and been working on the species that reside in them, somehow it never clicked that these landscapes are also endangered, like the species that inhabit them. So when we called it a name, if once you start naming something, giving it the right name, then it has meaning,
Yes.
and people are able to identify with it. And so people
Yes.
did start identifying with it. And we're really happy to see then that it's that people are using it. And like I said, the ministry also started, at least the environment ministry has started using it. The, it's catching on in normal parlance. But we do need to work to socialize it a little bit more amongst non-experts, amongst the broader swath of society.
Yes. In fact, yes, I was just thinking when you said that people have started using it, and I was just thinking about the society that I live in, which is not wildlifers or scientists or anything. And it's important to drive home the fact that there are savannas. Everybody knows the savannas of Africa, but to be able to introduce them to the savannas of India would be
Yeah,
important and lovely too.
yeah,
Prem, over to you. I've been talking all the time.
No, you should keep talking all the time because this is something that I mean, I've been hearing about Wastelands from Marty ever since I came to know her from 2012 or so. But Abhi, uh, John Locke, that you started with John Locke, and I think you were referring to the two treatises of government,
yes,
that paper book, whatever,
yeah.
1689.
1680, yeah. Mm.
Yeah. So his argument was that value of property derives from labor.
Yeah,
And you mentioned that, we've still inherited and built on that. So today we're seeing land not as living ecosystems in themselves, but as empty space. And that labor has to justify value of that land, right?
yeah,
That's how we've so because Aarti has been proselytizing the whole concept of wasteland, and I have conversations in my circles, talk about wasteland, one of the hard parts of that is trying to convince people that what looks like empty space actually has value. So I was wondering, and I think this is a common issue. I think people don't see value in open space. So could you possibly walk us through, let's say, a specific example where this kind of miscalculation has direct consequences on local ecosystems, local communities, etc.?
yeah. And this is something that we're really working on to try and bring the hidden value of these landscapes
Hmm.
into the mainstream conversation, because clearly, if something is not valued, then people don't assign, don't not value it properly, then people will clearly undervalue it,
Yeah,
or dismiss it, and say we can always do better with this.
right.
So there are multiple parts of this. One is, one from an aesthetic sense, uh, and a socio-cultural sense. We have sort of almost like this uh, dissonant relationship with open space.
Mm.
We all want an open space in front of our houses. We want a lawn. All these societies that you see around us have these big sprawling lawns. We don't want a dense forest in front of us. And ideally, we don't want a cluster of houses in front of us. We want the front of our house to be open. It's an open piece of land. It's got nothing else. You're actually putting money to keep it open. So
Right.
you've given some value to keeping it open. Um, but when you have naturally open lands in India, you tend to devalue them as being open and barren
Mm.
because
Mm,
nothing is growing there.
mm,
Now, what people also don't understand is that this perception of barrenness is an artifact of season. That they may appear to you barren if you go look at them in April, but
Mm.
go a couple of months later and they'll be verdant and green, because we do live in a monsoonal country.
Right.
We live in a country where our we have two chains of mountains that decide which how much rainfall any one place gets. So the Western Ghats create this long rain shadow to the east, and that's where all of our semi-arid landscapes are.
mm-hmm.
Whereas the Himalayas in the north stop the monsoon and allow it to dump all its rainfall in the Himalayan basin. So you have areas of high rainfall, you have areas of low rainfall. And where you have areas of low rainfall, obviously vegetation won't grow in the same manner as areas of high rainfall. And that's something that people tend to, I don't know, forget. So you can't have rainforests everywhere. You do have open ecosystems where things will not grow during the dry season. And people who have learned to exploit this seasonality are the nomadic pastoralists of India,
Hmm.
across India. Right from Tamil Nadu up into the west in Rajasthan, Gujarat, and east. There are nomadic pastoralist communities even in the Himalayas. So, with very little input, they managed to generate an economy that's worth 1.3 lakh crores annually. Okay? That's the value of that we derive from extensive pastoralism: milk, meat, dung, wool. Okay? These are all products that come from open ecosystems.
Yeah.
And it's in its it's a very large part, very high contribution to our agricultural GDP. Because without this manure that you get, that the system generates, you wouldn't be able to grow most of your crops. You would actually end up causing a skyrocketing of your fertilizer bill, for instance. Okay? And the people who are dependent on these for a livelihood are actually, having actually have quite a lot of wealth in that sense, because the livestock are wealth for them,
Yeah.
and they're economically fairly well off if you look at it in terms of just pure wealth. They might still be below the poverty line, they might still be marginalized because they don't have pakka homes, for instance. They carry all their belongings and go with them all the time. But in many other ways, they contribute hugely to the economic well-being of our landscapes. And so once you put that, once you bring that into the picture, because unfortunately we don't see animal production as part of agriculture. Only
Hmm.
recently have we started doing that. Whereas animal production is a hugely important part of agricultural GDP, and it's almost completely unvalued. It's a part of the informal economy. It's all
Mm.
there in cash, and it's never sort of formed part of mainstream economic policy. The other important thing is that the government actually puts very little money into this.
Hmm.
The government pumps huge amounts of money into growing crops,
Mm.
either through fertilizer subsidies or through building huge dams and canals to bring water for growing crops. But they've done almost nothing for extensive pastoralism. They spend a lot of money on intensive pastoralism, which means making sure everybody has a hybrid Jersey or Holstein Friesian cow so that you can get a lot more milk. But all of that also comes with high inputs. You have to grow the fodder to feed those cows. You have to have plants that will take crop residue and grain, convert it into pellets, and then feed those cows. So you have a system that actually works, and you have undervalued it. This system is also resilient because whether it's a drought or a year of abundant rainfall, the pastoralists have found ways of using that.
Yeah.
They found ways of adapting to it. They follow the rain. They go where the grass will be greener,
Yeah.
literally.
Mm.
So this is something we should actually be encouraging, because given given how uncertain and variable climate is going to be because of all the climate change issues that we have, this is a livelihood that's actually already adapted to this, and we should be encouraging this. But instead, we have been discouraging it over time. Government
Yeah.
schemes have always been to sedentarize
Yeah.
this economy, uh, to have encourage people to convert to agriculture, to stall feed their goats and sheep that were raised to walk very long distances, to bring
Absolutely.
in,
Yeah.
South African Boer goats because they have a higher feed conversion ratio. These are all high input processes, whereas, millions of people have managed to earn a very significant living through low input processes. And that's what we need to push for. That's what we need to promote. And this is something that we really, not just me, like several groups are now working on, pushing really hard for. So hopefully, through next year, which is the International Year for Rangelands and Pastoralism, the government will be able to give more focus to this, and we'll have policies that will be more pastoralism friendly coming forward.
Right. I mean, it's interesting you were talking about the pastoralists, and when we were doing Deeply Aarti, me, Rahul Bhatia, Kalyan Verma, and all of that, remember, Aarti, one of the stories was the Dangars of Maharashtra.
Yeah.
Uh,
Kalyan's Dangar story. Yeah.
Kalyan's
Yeah.
Dangar stories. Yeah, I just remembered that while Abi was talking. Over to you.
Couple of other things that I remembered when Abhi was talking is when he was talking about how they call their their wealth basically being
Yeah.
their livestock. Literally in Rajasthan they call it their chalta hua sona.
Huh.
They call it ye hamara chalta hua sona, and they point to their livestock. And also the fact that these traditional pastoralists who are constantly walking, and the flocks are also built to walk, it's very ecological in the sense that in these stressed landscapes, water stressed landscapes, the flocks don't wait long enough to deplete a water table. So
Right.
they pull water from shallow wells, they drink, and then they move on because that gives time for the well to to replenish itself. And so it's a cycle. By the time the next flock, somebody else's flock comes, that same well will have replenished itself. These are all percolation wells. So what's happening now with what Abhi referred to as sedentarization is that tube wells are being dug, and then that kind of incentivizes these large flocks to settle. And when they settle, those places also tend to get overgrazed. So,
Right.
it's kind of a double whammy in the sense that you're pulling from water which you're not supposed to pull from, and these traditional pastoralists know that. But government schemes and so on, they're kind of pushing in a slightly different direction. So my question, Abhi, to you, and that was something that we talked about when we were offline briefly due to technical issues. What headway are you guys making at the Center for Policy and Design at ATRI with government? Are they listening both in terms of ONEs and wastelands, but also pastoralists and the importance of these livelihoods, traditional livelihoods that depend upon these landscapes and commons?
So at the Center for Policy Design, we've really been trying to focus on bringing greater attention to these ONEs, and from multiple perspectives. So we've highlighted, what we call the PCB approach. So people, climate, biodiversity.
Mm.
So people are the pastoralists, the agro-pastoralists who depend on these landscapes. So we've tried to build the case, the economic case and the livelihood case of these landscapes. Now let's also, it's not just, so there's an economic value, but then, we take huge pride, great pride in having so many different types of livestock.
Mm.
We
Yeah,
have we are a global hotspot for livestock biodiversity or
that's true.
livestock diversity,
Diversity, yeah.
and that has emerged because of nomadic pastoralist groups selectively breeding animals to suit those purposes, the lands that they traverse. So you can have, camels in Kutch that swim
Yes.
across the creeks
Mangroves.
to,
Yeah,
to,
yeah,
to
yeah,
feed on mangroves.
yeah.
Okay, you can have the goats, beetle goats and Sirohi goats, and all of these that are long-legged,
Marwadi
adapted
goats. Yeah.
for they're
Mm.
adapted for walking long distances
Yeah.
in harsh climates. So the bunny buffalo, the bunny
Hmm.
buffalo is a unique breed. It's found in one of the hottest, driest places in India, in the Banni grasslands, it goes out to graze at night
Mm.
when it's much cooler and then comes back during the day. So,
And the Halari donkey also
yeah,
probably
yeah.
the white
So
donkey. Yeah.
all of these are unique breeds, and we need to be cherishing them. They are our, they are part of our cultural wealth as
Mm.
well, our identity. And in fact, the Maldharis of Gujarat, their Mal are their livestock. They are Maldharis.
Yes. Yes.
Even if they change their livelihood, they still they are still Maldharis.
Mm.
They want that identity to stick to them because that's
Mm.
a matter of pride. And I'm sure you've heard the same with the Raika and
Yeah.
with any other, in fact, with any other pastoralist community you go to, they really value their livestock.
Yes.
There
Yes.
was one Maldhari elder named Salim Mama in Manni who very famously said that when Ratan Tata built his nano factory, he took over a grassland to do it. And he said, उनकी नैनो तो 1 लाख में बिकती है, हमारी नैनो तो 2-3 लाख में बिकती है. And he was referring to his buffalo at that time.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
he said, उनकी नैनो जब बेचनी होगी तो उसको कुछ पैसा नहीं मिलेगा, हमारे नैनो बेचनी होगी तो वही दाम मिलेगा उनको. So they really value animals that they keep, that they are
Yeah.
there with. And this is something we should not lose sight of as well.
Yeah.
So it's, the economic argument is there. So what we've been really trying to do at CPD is to bring those stories in and tell it to people who will listen, whose job is to listen. So for example, we are working with the Center for Pastoralism to
Yeah.
then take some of these numbers to the Animal Husbandry Department
Right.
because it's their mandate. We went to the Ministry of Rural Development and the Department of Land Resources, who run India's watershed programs, okay, where they spend thousands of crores of rupees to improve the watershed so that they can have better water provisioning systems. And we said most of these are actually in the grasslands of the
Yeah.
semi-arid area.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, and therefore, if you start restoring the grasses there, it'll have dual purpose for you. It'll actually triple purpose for you. It will, it will prevent soil erosion. It will increase water flow, and it'll provide fodder as well.
Right.
And we highlighted that fodder deficiency is a huge problem
Mm.
across all of these areas. And that's because these grasslands have become degraded over time. They have been shrinking. There is increasing pressure. Aarti, you were talking about how, uh, people have been sedentarizing with their livestock, so that's causing greater degradation of these grasslands. The village commons everywhere have been diverted for various purposes.
Yeah.
So we do have a problem where our grasslands are becoming very degraded. So, so one of the things that we've also been doing is trying to not just say, don't do this when it comes to a practice. So, for example, if we are telling the Department of Land Resources or we're telling the Forest Department, don't plant trees or don't do this, what's an alternative? So, as part of that, we've started also now having pilot sites for grassland restoration across various states: Karnataka, Maharashtra, Rajasthan. We're going to soon start a project in Gujarat as well, where we have started grass nurseries of native grasses, ones that are drought tolerant, that used to be found there, which have high fodder value, and bringing them back to these grasslands
Yeah.
and working with the local communities to do that, or in some cases working with the forest department to do that.
Yeah.
So we're actually planting grasses in a wildlife sanctuary
Yeah.
with the forest department.
Mm.
We're working with the Deshnok Temple Trust in Bikaner to revive the Oran, that's the Deshnok Oran. So all of this will then go to form sort of an evidence building exercise where we can take these examples, these case studies to the government and say, look, this works.
Mm.
You can do this
Mm.
in an efficient manner, and
Mm.
it'll give you the results that you seek to get. Okay. The third part, the second part is for climate. We talk about carbon,
Yeah.
and this is something that thus far has not been part of India's climate story. That we have, we've made commitments under the Paris Agreement, what's called nationally determined contributions for carbon sequestration.
Yeah.
And we haven't included below ground carbon in this.
Yes.
The above ground carbon has been included.
Mm.
So we are now trying to make the case that if you restore grasslands, you can actually sequester significant amounts of carbon below ground at a fraction of the water that will be required and at very little cost.
Yeah.
Than going around doing tree planting programs that will
Exactly.
ultimately fail.
Exactly.
Because we are a drought prone country, we're a dry country. Most of India is dry.
Yeah.
So don't waste your money planting trees where they won't grow.
Yeah.
Instead, let's grow grass or restore the grasslands, and they will give you significant benefits for carbon sequestration. The third part, of course, is biodiversity. And this is something of, some people might not care about it, but I think a lot of us do. And as biologists, as ecologists, we care about it. So this is something, and it's also part of India's commitment to protect biodiversity. So we want to highlight the unique biodiversity of these landscapes. Whether it's great Indian bustards, the lesser florican, blackbuck, wolf, and now even the government wants to bring the cheetah back. And if you did want, now that you brought back the cheetahs and you want them to be free ranging across a large landscape and not just be fenced in, you will need to protect these grasslands, not just in Kuno, but for thousands of kilometers around it. So where are these grasslands? So this is where we can help you at least identify them. So you start protecting these now.
Mm.
Whether cheetahs will roam them in 20 years' time remains to be seen. But you need to protect them now. You also need to protect them because you're starting a campaign. You've started a project for conservation breeding of the great Indian bustard. If you're successful, and hopefully they will be successful, you will have a population of bustards to release. Where will you release them? The Desert National Park is there. The rest of it is now being converted to solar and wind farms.
Yes.
With power lines transmitting through them. So let's start looking for areas where we don't think about what is there now. Think about what you can protect for 20 years, 30 years down the line. And this is why you can protect it, or this is why you should protect it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like you need to form large protected areas there. We don't want national parks in our grasslands. We want areas that are community managed. Because if you start excluding pastoralists from those landscapes, they will not survive. You need the pastoralist to also be there. And because your conservation model, because of that, your conservation model also needs to change to one of coexistence and not exclusion. Okay? So you can have livestock generating economic value for pastoralists. You can have biodiversity existing there, and you can restore these grasslands so that below ground carbon is also restored and maintained through correct policies and correct action on the ground. So this is the kind of narrative we are building. There's a lot of uptake by the ministries because they understand that it works. We are of course also, we're still a long way to go because the science of this is still nascent. We're still building the evidence for all of this, but it's a intuitive case. People understand that the forest department, the Ministry of Environment understands that we've been trying to plant trees here for 50 years and it hasn't worked. The rural ministry understands that yes, there is a fodder deficit, and that we can't grow guinea grass and super napier everywhere because it requires a lot of water. We can't keep pumping out water to grow this. So if there is an alternative, they will start looking at it as well. So we're, hopefully all of these things come together. We have a perfect storm, and then we'll also have then a mission or a program on grasslands soon.
Fabulous. Yeah. I just wanted to say something before you jump into it, Prem. Just the thing, since we're talking about fodder and grasslands, in the desert, there's a grass which the desert pastoralists swear by called, they call it sevand.
Seven.
Yeah, Lazarus Syndicus.
Mm.
And that is fast being uprooted in large swathes because they're trying to convert it into agricultural land so that the Naher ka pani can be used
Mm.
for
Mm.
agriculture and so on. And there was significant amount of heartburn among the pastoralists when I was, just chatting with them, that these important grasses, because apparently it's very high in protein or
Yeah.
very high in,
Mm.
something for the uh, for the flocks, and
Mm.
they were saying that we're losing our, that's the resilience of our economy which we're losing. And hopefully now with your intervention and the fact that you guys seem to be finding vectors of arguments with the government, different governmental organizations, which departments which make sense to them. So even though they are siloed and they're probably not
Mm.
talking to each other, you're able to cut through by making the right case with the right people. And I really hope that it starts showing on ground as well.
Mm. Yeah, that's our hope as well. And you were mentioning Seven, so we actually have a nursery for Seven in
Ah,
in Bikaner,
oh,
because that's where see all livestock people recognize Seven.
mm,
They want it.
mm,
It's part of a it's ironic that they're uprooting in one place to grow. And this is something that we are seeing across the desert region as well, is that because of the either the Nahar water or through pumping of groundwater, people are growing 3 crops a year on sand dunes,
yeah,
Mm.
I see
and
that.
it's
Yeah,
going to salinize very quickly.
yes, it has been
uh,
also.
it's
So
already
there are,
started
yeah,
salinizing.
yeah,
And
Jaisalmer
but
district
because
has been seeing
yeah
that. Yeah, mm,
so and because land is so abundant, people can then just move on.
yeah.
um, but this is you're actually creating wastelands where none existed.
Exactly. That in margin lands, that's exactly how I end that
Mm.
chapter. That we're finally creating wastelands now, finally making
Mm.
the desert an actual wasteland, where earlier it was productive for various reasons. Over to you, Prem. Sorry.
Not at all. This has been fascinating. And the thing about wastelands, I mean, you have so many vectors, right? You have the human angle, you have the economic angle, you have all these things coming together. We could talk about it forever, but at some point, it suddenly occurred to me that Tabi is traveling, I presume, on work and has other things to do than just be talking to us. So I just wanted to move on a little bit. Uh, I mean, one of your key research areas is understanding how wildlife adapts to living alongside humans and
Mm.
domestic animals. And I was thinking of that because on social media, just a couple of days back, uh, there was this video that gained a certain amount of virality. An elephant uh, that went chasing after a guy and trampled him.
Yeah.
I think he survived, but whatever. And these kind of things get highlighted, but it's considerably rarer than the coexistence part, right? So I was wondering, could you talk to us a little bit about that three-way relationship, uh, wildlife, humans, domestic animals, all of them? What
Yeah.
works, what doesn't work, what are we doing wrong? All of that.
Yeah, so this is something that's always fascinated me about wildlife in India. Is that how
Hmm.
can there be so much wildlife in a country where there is, with the highest densities of humans?
Right.
And having worked in other countries as well, I lived in the US for a little bit. I worked in South Africa for a little while, and you see an almost complete separation. Especially for carnivores, there's complete separation. Although herbivores are everywhere. I mean, many U.S. cities in the Midwest are overrun by deer, mainly
Mhm.
because they've shot out all the pumas and
Wolves. Yeah.
wolves that used to exist there. But in India, you have people living cheek by jowl with predators that can either cause them monetary loss or direct loss of lives, and with other large animals. Um, and one I remember a scene from many years ago, I'd gone to Kaziranga, and a range forest officer had taken me to this village where somebody had just been killed by an elephant. And, I walked into the little hut, and, the person's body was lying there covered in a shroud. People, the mourners were there. But then in a corner was also a statue of Ganesha with, with the aarti there on it. And people were, this, um, this cultural, religious um, bonding between people and animals is very deep. And in many cases, people don't, Indians are deeply empathetic to the cause of animals. They don't want anybody to suffer unnecessarily. Um, Although there is a lot of cruelty towards animals as well, but for large swaths of people, animals also deserve to live. They also have, if if a if a dhangar loses one of his sheep or goats to a wolf, he says, even they need to eat.
Yes.
And they say that it's the wolf that keeps our flock on the move. It ensures that they're not staying in one place for too long. Um, people whose crops have been raided by elephants will not say that kill the elephants, but will say the forest department should provide food for them in the forest so they don't come out to eat our crops. So you know, there's this great sort of um, love for life, so to speak. And and what I want to really see is how do animals use this in, how are they living in these interstices? Because there is no such thing as only wildlife habitat and only human habitat. Not just in India, but actually anywhere in the world, what you term as wildlife will change from place to place. But in India, you can have proper wildlife. You can have leopards living in your backyard or
Hmm.
elephants visiting from time to time. But in the semi-arid landscapes, where most of the places that I've been working, you have hyenas, Indian foxes, jackals, jungle cats, leopards, wolves, living in agricultural lands and in small patches of savannas. And I wanted to really understand what is it about these landscapes that allows these animals to persist there? Um, what do they derive from the changes humans have made? And what are the tipping points? Is there a point beyond which some species will no longer exist here? Or, the habitat becomes more suitable for a different kind of species? So this is what was, the primary questions that motivated the work that I was doing. And mainly we found that, as humans are converting landscapes to become more homogenized or more agricultural, then you'll start seeing species that are adapted to agriculture persisting here. So things like jackals, jungle
Leopard,
cats,
leopards.
leopards
Mm.
will thrive,
Mm.
but habitat specialists such as Indian foxes, wolves will start disappearing
Mm.
because they depend on grasslands. Although with species like the Indian wolf, again, it's an interesting anomaly because it depends on grasslands, but also depends on the livestock that are in the grasslands. Most Indian wolves don't feed on wild prey. They don't feed on black buck and chinkara, but they instead eat goat and sheep. Or increasingly, they eat chicken. And I don't mean backyard chicken, I mean chicken from poultry farms that
Mm.
have been carelessly disposed by the roadside. Uh,
Oh.
so this is increasingly happening now everywhere, especially in Maharashtra and some of these states, because large poultry farms have come up everywhere.
Mm.
And the mechanism for disposal of dead poultry from those farms hasn't really fallen into place. So then they just put it in a sack and throw it by the roadside. And so what this causes is, it creates nicely fat wolves, jackals, foxes, devil cats all coming and feeding there, including hyenas. But occasionally somebody will decide that, oh, it stinks too much, or there are too many dogs here, and they'll just spray pesticide or malathion or something on it. And then you have a whole bunch of animals dead. because of this. So, these are all
Yuck.
challenges that you see happening
Yeah.
in our landscapes, and it's interesting to see what will happen because I don't, you know, we've got our conservation philosophy wrong, I believe, because we've aped too much the Western model of fortress conservation, where we thought that we can only conserve by excluding humans. But
Mm.
what we've forgotten that actually India still has wildlife because of the humans that are here. And if we had made and if we allow people to benefit from the wildlife that's around them, then you will have a lot more win-win cases. But you have to also accept that there will be some losses. Wherever conflict occurs, you have to be swift about it.
Yeah.
You have to remove the conflict-causing animal. You shouldn't turn that tolerance into intolerance
Mm.
because that's what will happen. If you
Yeah.
have lots of herds of wild pig and nilgai marauding crops, they're far from any forest. They're living in the fields. The farmers don't have any sympathy for them,
Correct.
right? So you're not going to have any sympathy for wildlife then.
Correct. In fact, that's
Um,
happening in Jaisalmer since we talked about the Naher and
yeah,
the farming of
yeah,
the dunes. With the water
yeah.
have come wild boar and nilgai.
Wild pigs,
Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
So,
So
yeah.
that's going to happen, and you need to be adaptive. Our Wildlife Protection Act is 50 years since it was enacted, and it needs to change now.
Mm.
It can no longer be because the Wildlife Protection Act also, and I've said this in several articles, is a restrictive act. It's not an enabling act. Um, it tells you what you shouldn't do. So it tells you can't hunt animals, you can't do this, you can't do that. But how do you prevent a species from becoming extinct or becoming endangered? Is not something that's enshrined in the act.
Mm.
So therefore, a great Indian bustard can hurtle towards extinction, and it'll only remain in Schedule 1 of the Wildlife Protection Act. That so there's nothing in the Wildlife Protection Act that says that we should, if something is in Schedule 1, all effort should go towards removing it from Schedule 1. Instead,
Right.
we almost have it as like a badge of honor that we
Right.
have rare, endangered, and threatened species.
Right.
Um, our policy instead should be to make them less endangered if they are becoming endangered due to human action.
Right.
I won't name the researcher, but a researcher told me that most researchers will never want that because then that dries up funding.
Yeah, yeah,
So, so
that's
it's in
true.
their
I
interest to keep it on the red
Yes,
list.
yeah. I struggled to get funding for working on Indian foxes when I was doing my research. Because they're least concerned, nobody bothers about them.
I want
Right.
to shift really quickly because I'm again, mindful of your time to something else that you're working on that you're known for, Abi, which is zoonosis. And where is India? This is a very broad question, and you can take it wherever you want. With respect to paying attention to surveillance of zoonosis or zoonotic diseases, as well as you know are there some things that we are doing better or some states that are doing this better than some other states? So can you just just shed a little bit of light on zoonosis itself, given the fact that we've gone through COVID and the pandemic and all of that, but more than that, right? There's the rabies,
Yeah,
there's other things, there's KFD, there's all kinds of other
yeah.
probably diseases that are coming up with the rising heat, maybe, or various other encroachments and so on. So, can you just shed a little bit of light on
Yeah.
zoonosis and where India is with respect to that?
Yeah. So, I'll just, in case people might be wondering why I'm interested in zoonosis, it's really it's an extension of the work of interactions. What Prem was asking me,
Yeah.
wildlife, people, livestock. This is all interactions between species,
Mm.
and disease is also another component of that interaction, of that interface. And so when I was doing my PhD, I was I wanted to study Indian foxes, but I actually ended up studying domestic dogs because there were more dogs than any other species in those landscapes. And so I started looking at what are the impacts of dogs on foxes and other small carnivores. And disease was one of the angles that I was exploring. Um, and so I found that, this obviously dogs carry a lot of diseases that can affect native mesocarnivores, including foxes. We had a canine distemper virus outbreak, which wiped out half the fox population in that landscape I was working in. And rabies also was obviously present there.
Mm.
So I started looking at rabies a little bit more deeply a few years later, and I brought in the public health angle into that because obviously rabies is of public health concern. And what I realized is that in India, we don't tend to view diseases um, as part of, or rather, we view diseases in isolation,
Mhm.
that we only view them from the perspective of the disease and what its effect on humans will be or on animals will be. But we don't view it as part of an ecosystem. Therefore, the control or the understanding of where the disease is coming from and how to control it is then never sort of explored
Mm.
from an ecosystem lens or from an ecological lens. Whereas disease is also part of ecosystems, or disease pathogens are part of ecosystems. They are also organisms and there are interactions there. And so that's where the whole One Health angle comes in. And zoonosis being a pathogen, a disease-causing pathogen that spreads from animals to humans, which
Right.
means there is an interaction term there. You have to have something that passes either directly or via an intermediary to humans. And so I became interested in understanding what is the ecology of the species that hosts these pathogens that can cause it. What drives them? How do conditions change that can cause a disease to go from an animal to a human? So then it was, whether it's rabies or Casanova forest disease or any you can then use this principle to study any zoonosis. And I realized then that we are in India, we've really not used the ecological lens to understand this problem. And so this is what I had been pushing for in when our One Health dialogues and framework were being talked about, because it's not just public health or veterinaries, people who need to look at it, because they will look at it sector specific. But to truly bring in the One Health angle, you need to have a overall framing for it. And that overall framing comes from an ecosystem perspective. And from a human health perspective, you also need a sociological perspective, because it's human behavior that also drives
Mm-hmm.
disease spread. So these things also need to come into play, and this is what we were trying to work with a couple of projects that I was involved in.
So for example, Kerala seems to be doing, is it that they do more surveillance, which is why you hear of more zoonotic disease there, or are there any states that are getting this right, doing it well, whether it's rabies, whether it's Nipah, whether it's whatever?
Mm. Now, certainly Kerala seems to be up there in terms of its surveillance infrastructure. Um, and Kerala, Tamil Nadu, all of these are states that do fairly well. Rabies is a big problem because um, people still treat rabies as a public health concern rather than a zoonotic concern. So therefore, all the focus is on vaccination of people who have been exposed to rabies. And there's also all the other issues with domestic dogs and our policies with domestic dogs that have really not, so the rabies is the only disease where the health department does not frame the policy for vector control. Uh, Whereas
Who
for
d-
all the
who
others,
who does?
the Ministry of Culture and the animal birth control rules, and
Oh.
now the animal husbandry department or whatever. So when the animal birth control rules came into place for dogs, so which is what the big brouhaha right now is about. Which basically with any other, if you looked at any other disease causing vector, whether it's rats, mosquitoes, or whatever, the health department will then issue an advisory on how to control that. If it's mosquitoes, then municipal authorities are told to go and make sure there's no breeding place for mosquitoes, go and fog them, etc. With rats, it's the same thing. You go and I don't see anybody shedding a tear for rats when rat elimination takes place. Um, but with dogs, obviously, it's a different scenario. We've got these very specific rules just in place just for dogs. And so it's really not seen as a public health concern when it comes to dog control.
Mm.
Instead, we've gone for this mass vaccination program. But the problem is that we have too many dogs to be vaccinated at the same time. We have like 60 to 80 million dogs in a large country. We don't have the infrastructure to vaccinate all of them, and that's a problem. I mean, it's a problem from multiple perspectives. If you formed a policy that said that you should capture them, neuter them, vaccinate them, release them, it sounds good on paper, but in practice it would never work because you never really built up the infrastructure. Now, oddly enough, this is also the argument that the proponents of the animal birth control program are saying against the capture of dogs as mandated by the Supreme Court in its recent judgment. So in some senses they're speaking from both sides of their mouth. So you're saying ABC is the only way to do it, but we don't have the resources and the capacity to do it. So therefore it will never be done properly. And they're saying we don't have the resources to capture all the dogs, so that should not happen. But the fact is that it's been 20 years of the animal birth control policy, and if a city like Delhi, which is our national capital, has not built up the infrastructure for controlling them, it means it's never going to happen anywhere. And so therefore rabies itself is not going to be eliminated in dogs, certainly, anywhere in this country, at the scale that it requires. The only thing one can hope for is that the rabies vaccine is more widely available for people who get exposed to. So at least human deaths are brought down. And that's probably the only way of reducing human cases. You will not reduce the exposure levels, and that's still going to be a very high cost to everybody involved.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Abi, earlier you talked about disrupted natural systems, and in responding to Arti's first question about zoonotic diseases, you specifically said that disease as part of an ecosystem is what you said. So I just basically I think this is more for the benefit of viewers who may not have been exposed to some of your past work. Your argument always has been that the human, the animal, and the environmental health are interconnected, right? Having said that, and then using just rabies as an example, where I remember the statistic that 36% of global rabies deaths happen in India. If you connect up environment and your One Health theory, could we then talk about, or how does this connect up to the broader story of how we've disrupted our natural systems?
So the idea that the framing that you mentioned is the One Health framework that human health, environmental health, and animal health are all interconnected. Right. And therefore, to influence human health, you also have to look at animal health and environmental health. And a good example of this is this interconnectedness is, for example, with KFD, Casanova forest disease, which is spread by a tick. It's a virus, but it's spread by ticks, and it's most prevalent along the Western Ghats especially in Karnataka, but it's also been found in Kerala, Tamil Nadu, not so much in Tamil Nadu, but Kerala, and over time, more recently, Maharashtra and Goa as well. It's a disease that seems to affect people working in plantations in forest areas, and it seems to be more prevalent in areas where there are higher livestock populations, for instance. And so the whole cycle of KFT is really interesting, and it really tells us how different components of the ecosystem play a part in where the risk of this disease is higher. So, for example, it can, it ticks carry it from one source to another, but it's found in a whole variety of small animals. But the virus itself is present in rodents, in bats, in birds, in shrews, and it's sort of really it's part of this forest landscape that that's sort of um, that's got this that's been changed, that's changed a lot over time. And monkeys are involved in there, of course. Monkeys serve as sentinel species. So it's changed over time because a lot of primary forest has been lost. There's a lot of paddy cultivation in these areas now. Areca nut plantations have come up. Commercial plantations have come up. So it's really changed the interface between between humans and all of these host animals. And so therefore the probability of somebody encountering a tick which is carrying the virus also increases just by people going about their daily routines. So
Right.
that's where how a change in the environment can also affect the probability of a disease going from one to another increases.
Yeah.
Arti?
There's so much more that I can talk to Abi about, but
Yeah.
we'll just go on and on forever. There is one thing that we haven't touched upon, but maybe we can leave that for another time. The Ranthambore question, which I was very
Right.
keen on
Yeah.
getting Abi's take on, but we'll leave that for another time.
Yeah. Abi, to round off this whole thing, one of the common threads, either overtly or covertly, that has run through this entire conversation is the disconnect between the science and the policy. Now, you work closely on that interface, right, between science and policy. What is the biggest gap that you see between the research on these ecosystems and what policy actually does?
So the biggest gap that we've seen really is that the science seems to work in a vacuum. Scientists don't speak to policymakers and vice versa also. So what we're really trying to say is that let's communicate better. Scientific findings. So there are multiple things. You can do science which is pure science for the sake of knowledge, and you can do science that is applied science, where you're trying to solve certain problems. But maybe it's a good idea for scientists to first understand the scope of the problem and who it's a problem for, and therefore who the solution you want to present to. So identify your stakeholders. And this is something that most scientists tend not to do. They still view it as an academic exercise. And and I guess that's why there's less uptake of that science by policymakers, because often that science has not been framed in a way that will help policymakers to put it into practice. It can still sound very high level and of not be useful to policymakers. So it's important for there to be dialogue, and vice versa. I strongly feel that policymakers also, while taking decisions, they are not taking them in a vacuum. They are also depending on some input coming from somewhere. So it's up to us to really determine that what that environment of input should look like, that ecosystem of input. So we should be part of that network. And so it's up to certainly in India, we need to interface better with policymakers, ask them the right questions, understand their concerns when looking at the problem, so that the solutions we present are something that they can actually put in place and not just be on paper. Because you can, also scientists tend to typically be a little circumspect when giving uh, solution-oriented
Right.
recommendations. We often say it depends when asked a question. And that doesn't work for policymakers. So we do have to be a little bit more forthright. We do have to recognize that no matter what answer you give, something will go wrong somewhere. So it's a calculated risk you have to take. The thing that you have to try and understand the most is that you have to build in a system of adaptive uh, governance or adaptive practices which change with feedback. It shouldn't be something static. So if you have said something, try and understand what would the downstream effects of that be. If you put any, if you're recommending any change or any action, then let's understand what the unintended consequences of that action can also be,
Mhm.
and try and plan for that. Build it into your system, but monitor, because some things you can't predict. You don't know what will happen. So monitor, and if you start seeing something emerging, then course correct. So
Right.
do
Exactly.
adaptive management.
Right.
But we tend to not do that. We tend to then become dogmatic also. And so this
Yes.
is something we want to, dogma can come from both sides. It can, I mean, once a scheme is in place, then it also gets set in stone almost, and changing that becomes difficult. So I think really adaptive management, feedback loops, monitoring and evaluation and learning are all systems we need to put into place in the Indian context so that we are better able to, you know, manage our system better, especially now when there's so much uncertainty with the climate and with
Mhm.
with with socio-economic and socio-ecological changes around us.
I was just thinking, this is our 12th episode, the one that we are recording right now.
Okay.
And by my count, you're the fourth person out of these 12 who said X doesn't speak to Y is central to the problem, or X and Y speak different languages, both of which you
Right.
just said. Hati, you want to take Abi through to the close?
Sure. I mean, that's it's a central theme in margin
Yeah.
lands as well. The fact that we're living in silos, we operate in
Yeah.
silos, and oftentimes the people who are affected most by the policies and by the things that are put into place are not at the table. They're not in the conversation at all.
Yeah.
So, um, yeah, thank you, Abhi, for what you do, and it's just so important, so huge, and I have just been I mean, if you wake me up in the middle of the night and you say, who is the champion of these things that you care about? I know I always think of you, Abhi. So, thank you so much for what you do and for fighting for these ecosystems, which are, almost overlooked by everybody, and
Yeah.
hopefully they have a future which is different, and the fact that we can start looking at things as a system and seeing the interconnectedness of
Sure.
so many things. Thank you so much for
My
that. Thank
pleasure.
you for
Yeah. Thanks
being
for this
here
long
with us.
conversation. It's great.
Yeah,
It's
thank
been
you. It's
great
been
talking to
really
you.
Yeah.
long.
And
Thanks for
Abhi,
that.
I was just looking at my notebook where before this, we started recording, between Aarti and I, we'd made a lot of notes about things that we needed to talk to you about. And I realized that we've covered probably one third, if that.
Yeah, that's a
So
lot.
I think what I'm trying to say is we need to get you back. So
We
yeah,
can have
That's a
another
thing.
conversation about that. That's
Yes,
fine.
exactly.
yes,
Yeah.
definitely. Thank you so
All right.
much, Abhi,
My
and
pleasure. My pleasure.
take care. Yeah, safe travels.
Bye.
Thanks, Abhi. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye bye.
Bye. And so that was Abi Vanak. And if you have read Margin Lands, you've already met him because he has been advising me through a few chapters in Margin Lands. What did you make of it, Prem, of the talk?
It's one of the commonalities, right, of the 12 episodes. The 12 episodes, we've had about 10 guests, maybe 10 guests, yeah. Uh, that you have a conversation, and before we start the conversation, we think, okay, we need to cover X, Y, Z subjects because that's what this person is best known for, what he's best fitted to explain to our audience. And at the end of the conversation, you realize that you've done just a fraction of what you wanted to discuss with that person, simply because there is so much to each of these subjects, right? I mean, we talked about, say, wastelands. And I think we spent a good half hour discussing wastelands with the Abi, and we
Mm.
haven't scratched the surface. We talked about zoonotic diseases, the same thing. I mean, we
Yep.
haven't gotten anywhere close uh, to covering the subject. Uh, but yeah, what there is interesting. It's thought provoking. In fact, while he was talking, I was rapidly making notes about things that I need to read upon to understand some of these things better. So yeah, it's it's a thing that I like about all the guests we've had so far, that they don't just inform us, they show us avenues, pathways for further exploration.
Yeah.
And in the process, they give us a lot of story ideas, which is a bonus.
That too. But I think one of the things that I really admire about people like Abi is that they truly embody thinking, working, acting beyond silos. He he works with pastoralists. He works with people in government. He works with scientists. He works as a scientist. He works with health. He works with disease. It's just like that is life. That is how life unfolds, and he works in all of those avenues, and that's why he makes so much sense. That's
Yeah,
why he's not straitjacketed. He doesn't straitjacket himself, of course, but then also when he's giving an answer, he's touching upon all these different things. When he's talking about
right.
something, he
Yeah,
says, "Oh, that's why policy needs to talk about this, or this is why policy is not addressing this, and right now that's why we're stuck." And that's why I really enjoy speaking with him. I know every time I pick up the phone to talk to Abi, I'm going to get the spectrum of views, and it's almost like a one-stop shop. I don't need to talk to
yeah,
too many other people if I talk to Abi, because he kind of tells me he's talking to them all, and that's really so important and so rare, really,
right.
in our research as well as policy today. And I think it's
Yeah,
really great that we're doing that ATRI has this CPD initiative, the Center for Policy and Design, and has people like this, because I think that's really what was kind of a lacuna in our research and scientific establishments. This interface with policy and having an eye on it.
yeah. And those also, I mean, one of the things that I'm reluctant to do, and I know you take that reluctance to an even greater degree, is talk about work that we've done. But listening to Abi, there was also a bittersweet feel to it, because look at the number of topics he touched on that we explored during our People days.
Yeah,
Uh,
literally. Yes. All
yeah,
of this, right?
yeah.
All of this. Yeah.
So,
And I think it's so interesting. The more we talk to people like Abi, we talk to people like Pradeep or Pranay, even
mhm.
Yuvan, all of these guys. I feel like it's important almost to have these guys back on a panel
Yeah,
sometimes, where we're discussing issues, but then they're all talking to each other as well. And I can
exactly.
imagine how rich that conversation will be. And it may be something that we want to think about going forward for From the Marginlands, to
Yeah,
have one
seriously.
episode with
Yeah,
multiple guests
correct. And multiple guests all at the same time, not
at the same time.
recording again.
At
Yeah.
the same time, yeah.
So they can sort of talk to each other and we can just sit back and listen and learn.
Yes, we ask the questions, we ask the uncomfortable questions, in fact, even, and see how each one addresses it. And
Yeah.
maybe this is best done in person. We probably,
There's
if we
that.
can, yes.
And with an audience, right? If possible.
Oh, it'd be interesting to have interaction. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah,
Someplace like Big or something like, yeah.
yeah.
It's something that we should think about.
Yes, absolutely.
And so with that, we'll
Okay,
wrap.
so yeah, great. I think this is fodder, a lot of fodder for thought,
Yeah.
and it's something that is so dear to my heart. The pastoralists and the open natural ecosystems are so important. So remember those three words, guys, and whenever you see these places, they're wrongly called forests, as he pointed out. remember to recognize open natural ecosystems as open natural ecosystems and give them their due because they're super important ecosystems.
Right. And as we sign off, also remember to hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. One of the nice things is that our subscriber numbers have been increasing of late, which is nice. Fingers crossed, yes. And so hit the subscribe button, hit the bell icon, send us your thoughts, send us questions that you would like addressed in future episodes, send us guests you would like to see in future episodes, or just talk to us. Yeah.
Yep. Thank you, guys. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.